I called my wife's lover. The phone rang twice, 3 times, and his voice answered casually. I could imagine the scene on the other side, his smile in response to her presence, the contained, complicit silence. So I let my breathing sound heavy on the other end of the line before whispering, "I know everything." On the other side, the muffled sound of low voices and movements stopped. The tension crossed the line. He stuttered, trying to hide it, but panic had already set in. I didn't need to say anything else, I knew that one sentence was enough to trigger chaos. I heard the tremor in his voice as he tried to formulate a response. And she, my wife, would be floored. At that moment, I could see her look, full of terror, as she realized that the secret they had kept in the shadows was now exposed to the raw, unforgiving light. The betrayal. The shock was so violent that my mind shattered with every thought. Like a poisonous viper, the image of her smile hugging me falsely, while, in my absence, she intertwined secrets with another man, squeezed my chest. So many nights when she went out, to relax, kissing me in a hurry, saying she needed some time, a breather, and I trusted, giving her my affection, believing in every word. The confirmation arrived one afternoon when I decided to follow it. It was just to get the absurd idea out of my head that had been hammering my sanity. That nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I wanted, more than anything, to be wrong. And there she was, smiling in a way that she no longer smiled at me, laughing with a youthful glow, a fire that she no longer showed me. And, at that moment, there was no doubt, the sparkle in her eyes was for someone else. The pain, the anger. I thought about confronting them right there, but I decided not to put on the show they both could have expected. I left silently, letting shock boil in every fiber of my being. I wouldn't sleep until I made a decision about what to do, until I thought about every detail, every word. It was a game of patience, and now I had the most powerful weapon of all, their secret. The following dawn became my battlefield. Alone, surrounded by photos, messages and fragments of what had once been a solid marriage, every detail revealed itself like an open wound. And she, my wife, slept next to me, without knowing that her lies were unfolding before me. I knew where they were, how they were, and now I just needed to choose the moment to attack. The next morning, her voice sounded calm, soft, asking how I was, as if everything was in perfect order. I felt the bitter taste of the lie, and my answer came out harshly. I didn't know how long I could hold that theater without exploding, without saying I knew everything. Her mask was wide open in front of me, but she still acted like she was the faithful wife. And then that afternoon, while they were together, I called. His response was an empty babble, without any control. "Who is it?" The question came out with a hint of nervousness that he tried to hide. I left him hanging, breathing light and long on the other end of the line, until my voice rang out, strong and merciless, "I know everything." For a moment, the silence was absolute. He held his breath, and deep down she must have been static, not knowing what to do, what excuse to make. On one side, the muffled sound of two panicked accomplices, on the other, the weight of a silence that cut like a knife. None of them imagined that the peaceful, forbidden moment they shared would become a trap. In that instant, the security they built on lies crumbled. And now, I had them where I wanted them. When I hung up, a wave of adrenaline overcame me. The game was just beginning, and I knew exactly where to land the next blow. Welcome to our channel. Here, we never support or justify betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional and have a clear purpose, to reveal the devastating impact that betrayal has on people's lives. Get ready, because the story that comes next is intense and full of twists and turns. Hold on tight and enjoy, this is going to be a shocking experience. It was a morning like any other in Thomas's life, and he, as usual, was up before the sun rose. The city was still asleep when he got up and made himself a strong coffee, ready to face the day. There was an almost sacred stillness in those early hours, something he always liked to keep to himself, as a space where he could be himself without the mask of work or the responsibilities that came with marriage and family. Thomas was a meticulous, detail-oriented man who had built a life with his wife, Lauren, for years. He remembered well how they met, in a cafe in the city. Lauren was radiant, with a wide smile and bright eyes that seemed to capture all the attention around her. She had an energy that attracted him, a kind of zest for life that balanced his reserved temperament. It was not uncommon for friends to say that they completed each other, he, the pillar of stability, she, the free and passionate wind. And for a long time that was enough, or at least it seemed to be enough. There was something deep and sincere in the relationship they had built over the years. But, as with many marriages, time passed and the sparks of those first dates gave way to a smooth, predictable routine. Thomas, a manager at a technology company, dedicated himself to his work with the same precision with which he had always done everything in his life. In every decision, in every spreadsheet, there was something of his effort and his search for stability. For him, success was having built a solid, uneventful life. This brought him pride and a sense of accomplishment. Lauren, on the other hand, had a restless soul. A graphic designer, she had a creative spirit and a lightness in her eyes that contrasted with Thomas's seriousness. She was involved in artistic projects, spent nights working on paintings and found peace in her hours in the improvised studio he had set up in the garage at home, a place full of brushes and vibrant colors. Despite the routine, Thomas made an effort to take care of his marriage with small gestures, flowers on ordinary days, loving messages throughout the day, and even planning trips when work allowed. Deep down, he knew that, as much as his life was driven by order and discipline, Lauren brought a lightness that he needed to make sense of it all. And even though the novelty years had passed, there was still a mutual respect that seemed to sustain them. The routine, however, was dense and, over time, a certain distance between them became present, like a thin layer of ice that no one knew exactly how or when it had formed. Little by little, Thomas noticed that the dinner table gatherings became quieter. Lauren was increasingly absorbed in her projects, with her gaze always distant, lost in ideas that he couldn't reach. At the same time, Thomas began to feel that perhaps he was losing control of something essential, a vague sensation that time was leaving its invisible marks. Thomas's workdays were long and demanding. He came back late, exhausted, and sometimes found Lauren on the couch, focused on a book or distracted by a series. They talked about the basics, but there was no longer that connection that previously came naturally from someone who shares life, dreams, and even the most hidden concerns. Lauren seemed to be there and, at the same time, distant, as if her mind was wandering to other places. And although there were no words between them about it, they both knew that the intimacy from before was becoming a memory more than a presence. Lauren, on the other hand, spent her days filling the void with art. He took refuge in the colors, in the canvases, trying to find an answer to that restlessness that seemed to corrode his inner peace. The conversations that once made her laugh or feel safe were gone, replaced by polite, objective dialogue. At night, when she lay next to Thomas, she felt the warmth of his body, but also the coldness of a distance she couldn't fully understand. Sometimes she thought about talking, opening her heart about how she felt suffocated by the monotony that seemed to dominate her life. But Thomas's gaze, always so confident and focused, made her hesitate. He, without knowing exactly why, noticed the changes, but was convinced that they were normal, part of the maturation of a relationship that adapted over the years. Thomas wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. She always believed that love was, for the most part, a daily work, something that was built and adjusted. And, even on the hardest days, he never thought that Lauren could be unhappy by his side. As the two navigated this increasingly cold and silent routine, the tension between them intensified almost imperceptibly but continually. Each silence at the table, each night in which bodies rested together without touching, each day in which Thomas immersed himself in work and Lauren took refuge in the studio, increased the feeling that something fundamental was being lost. They didn't talk about it, as if silence could protect what was still between them. It was an implicit pact to avoid confrontation, to preserve stability. After all, for Thomas, stability was what he had always sought in life, what he believed to be the basis of lasting love. As the months went by, Thomas noticed that Lauren was more absent than usual, leaving at unexpected times, going on dates with friends he had never met. She began to dress with a lightness that he hadn't seen in years, she put on careful makeup and even smiled more. For him, seeing Lauren happy was a comfort, even though he didn't know the exact reason for so much sudden joy. There were no suspicions in his heart, just a vague concern, like a premonition that he quickly dismissed. One night, Thomas came home early. The room was dark, and he found a note in the kitchen, a rare thing to see. "I went out with a friend. I'll be back late. Kisses, Lauren." He stared at the words for a moment, feeling a slight pressure in his chest. She didn't usually leave like this, without warning, without at least a more personal message. But, as always, Thomas took a deep breath, believing it was just a reflection of his own insecurities. In the following days, Thomas's gestures of affection became more insistent, as if he was trying to rekindle something that, little by little, he realized was fading away. "I tried to surprise her with a gift, an impromptu dinner, or with sweet notes spread around the house. However, nothing seemed to touch Lauren. She always responded with a polite smile, a quick kiss, a thank you that sounded almost automatic." Thomas wondered, in moments of doubt, if all that was enough to support what they had built. He could have sworn that, even without knowing the reason, something much bigger and darker was lurking around their marriage. Lauren, in turn, remained increasingly distant. Meetings, with friends, became frequent, and there were days when she would return late, without bothering to justify the time. Thomas didn't want to question her. He feared that any accusation, even if made gently, would break the delicate structure of normality that he strived to maintain. He trusted her, he wanted to believe that that absence was just a phase, an escape from something that she herself couldn't explain. The studio, Lauren's refuge, was the only space where she seemed completely happy. "I would spend hours there, lost between brushes and colors, sometimes until dawn." Thomas even peeked through the door, seeing her concentrated, as if the world around her didn't exist. And he watched her with a mixture of love and uncertainty that he would never dare express. "I knew something was different, but I didn't want to face what that could mean." The harmony that had sustained them for years, like a balanced and seemingly solid marriage, now seemed like a distant memory. Thomas tried to avoid confrontation, believing that silence could avert a storm, while Lauren, wrapped up in her own emotions, moved further and further away. Thus, they continued their days as strangers under the same roof, maintaining the minimum of harmony that had once been the basis of what they called love. The routine continued for Thomas, but a restlessness began to consume his thoughts in an almost obsessive way. He tried to ignore, to divert himself from that disturbing idea that was haunting him, but it was as if a shadow hovered over everything around him, obscuring any certainty. Lauren was increasingly distant, with frequent departures and an obvious disconnect between them. Their schedules didn't coincide, their conversations were quick, empty, and the looks they exchanged were like strangers. One night, upon arriving home early from work, Thomas found Lauren in the mirror, choosing a dress he hadn't seen her wear in years. She was more beautiful than ever, but the smile on her face as she got ready, the light way she smoothed her hair, the way she looked at her reflection with silent expectation, all of it was like a blow to him. There was something there that wasn't for him, an energy that didn't include him, and it shook him more than he cared to admit. In the days that followed, distrust became uncontrollable. He began to notice the details, to notice every message received on her phone, every distant look, every hidden smile. He felt like he was sinking in a sea of doubts, but he didn't have the courage to confront her. The fear of the answer paralyzed him, and the uncertainty eroded his sleep, his appetite and even his concentration at work. When they were together, Thomas felt invisible, as if his presence was not noticed, and the idea that there was something or someone stealing his wife little by little tortured him. That Friday afternoon, Thomas decided to follow Lauren. He watched as she left the house, dressed with a touch of elegance and a perfume he hadn't smelled in a long time. He followed her at a safe distance, paying attention to the signs, the path, the destination. His heart was beating so hard that he felt as if he could hear every beat, as if his entire body were a tense rope about to snap. Every street he walked, every sign, he wondered if, somehow, he was making a mistake, if all that anguish was nothing more than unfair paranoia. But the answer was close, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. Lauren stopped at a discreet cafe in the city center. Thomas parked the car in the distance, staying out of sight. He saw her enter, walking with light steps and a twinkle in her eyes. She waited a few minutes until a man approached and sat down next to her, and from where he was, he could observe the familiarity between the two. There was something intimate in the way they laughed, in the way the man touched her lightly, in the way their eyes met. For Thomas, it was as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He felt a deep tightness in his chest, a pain that left him breathless, a feeling of betrayal so intense that he couldn't move a single muscle. They spent almost an hour there, laughing and talking like a couple in love. Thomas watched, each gesture registered in his mind like an open wound. He could have walked in, confronted them right there, but something held him back. It was as if he wanted to understand how far that lie would go, how far Lauren was willing to go. And then, he saw the two of them leave together, arm in arm, walking side by side down the street. His heart was a storm of emotions, but his steps were calculated. He followed them at a distance, without looking away, every moment etched in his memory like a scar. That man looked younger, someone with a lightness that he himself felt he had lost. With every touch he saw, every smile exchanged between them, Thomas wondered where he had gone wrong. He wondered what he hadn't done, what he had missed that allowed Lauren to find in another what he had thought for so long was his role to offer. It was a silent anguish, a blow that echoed inside him in a way no other man could understand. When they entered an inconspicuous hotel, the confirmation he so feared finally crystallized. He stood still for a moment, his gaze fixed on the door that had swallowed them. It was real. All the suspicion, all the discomfort of the last few months, every expression of her absence, it all made sense now. It was as if the pieces of a cruel puzzle finally fell into place, revealing an image he never wanted to see. Lauren, his wife, the woman with whom he had shared years of life, was with someone else. In that instant, Thomas felt an anger and pain he had never experienced. He wanted to confront her, he wanted to scream, demand answers, see her face showing regret. But he knew that this was not the time. I needed a plan, I needed more than the despair of that moment. He returned to the car, his body still shaking with adrenaline and anguish. The way back home was a torment. He felt exhausted, as if every piece of him had been broken. Arriving home did not bring relief. The silence of the empty rooms amplified the loneliness he felt, and when he looked in the mirror, he almost didn't recognize his own reflection. That man with tired eyes, his face marked by pain, wasn't him. There was something broken inside him, something he knew he might never be able to restore. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay awake, reliving every detail he had seen, every smile Lauren had given another man, every minute of his own absence. He thought about how he would confront her, what he would say, how she might react. The pain of learning about the betrayal was overwhelming, but a part of him wanted to understand why, how everything had gotten to that point. Deep down, he felt like a puppet, manipulated by the decisions and lies she hid. And then, an idea took shape in his mind. He wouldn't confront Lauren right away, he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the effect it had on her life. Instead, he would remain calm, carry on as if nothing had happened. He needed time to digest, to understand and, most importantly, to plan his next action. On that cold, gray morning, Thomas was determined. The night before had been a whirlwind of thoughts, and now he was preparing for the call that would change everything. He observed his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his tired face, his deep eyes, an expression of someone who no longer recognized his own life. It was time to end that lie, to take off the mask of the woman he still loved, but whose betrayal tore him apart. With his cell phone in his hands, he took a deep breath, selected the number and called. On the other end of the line, the phone only rang a few times before being answered. He didn't give time for his name to be asked. With a firm voice and contained anger, he simply said, "I know everything." Silence was the initial response, and Thomas knew he had had the desired effect. I could feel the tension, the immediate panic. He heard a murmur in the background, a sudden movement, as if the two were trying to hide their shock. Her lover replied in a faint voice, Who is speaking?" "I know exactly who you are," Thomas said, his voice low but cutting. "And I know who is by your side now." He paused, listening to the desperate silence on the other end. "Do you think you can fool me? Do you think I don't know about the meetings, the lies, the furtive touches?" That's a mistake," the man replied, trying to sound confident, but the hesitation was clear. Lauren, by now, must have been in absolute shock, her eyes wide, unable to hide the guilt she had carried in silence for so long. Thomas hung up without waiting for a response. He knew that those words would be enough to create panic. In silence, he imagined the two of them looking at each other, Lauren desperately searching for an excuse, a plan to cover up what was already open. He knew that, for her, the biggest fear was losing her comfortable life, her image as a perfect wife and woman that she had worked so hard to build. Hours later, he found her at home, in the same place as always, but now there was something different. She looked down, her shoulders hunched, visibly upset, as if she was expecting a confrontation. Thomas watched her in silence, waiting for her to speak, but Lauren just looked away, feigning distraction. He approached, his voice somewhat restrained but firm. "There's no point anymore, Lauren. I already know." She shuddered, bringing her hands to her face as if, for a moment, she was about to collapse. Her expression changed, the guilt and tension clearly visible. She tried to hide it, but his words were inescapable. You don't understand, I don't understand." He laughed, a bitter laugh. "Do you think I don't understand what it's like to live next to someone who lies, who pretends, who betrays the trust we've built for years?" He stared at her, his eyes burning with a pain she had never seen before. "Explain, Lauren. I want to hear it from your mouth." She took a deep, hesitant breath, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "Thomas, it wasn't supposed to be like this. I just felt alone." He shook his head, his gaze fixed on her, steady and unwavering. "Alone? About to look for another one?" He moved closer, his voice filled with bitterness. "Is that what you found in him, Lauren? The attention I didn't know how to give?" "It's not just that," she said, her voice weak. And at that moment, his expression fell, his eyes filled with tears. "No, it wasn't just that." "So what else was it?" he asked, crossing his arms and leaning in to listen to her. Every word she said would be their last chance to show regret, to try to regain something of what they had lost. But instead, he noticed her hesitating. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, she began, "I'm not the only one, hiding something." Thomas frowned, perplexed. The statement took him by surprise. He had prepared himself to hear excuses, empty justifications. But that sounded different, like there was another truth buried between them, something he hadn't touched on yet. "Like this?" he asked, his voice lower, tone mixed between anger and confusion. Lauren avoided his gaze, her voice now shaking. "His wife, she doesn't know. Anne." "Thomas, I don't think you knew either." She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if afraid to look at him directly. "I knew what?" His voice was a mixture of anger and impatience. He was losing what little patience he had left. She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "His wife, she is also known to you." Thomas felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The woman Lauren was talking about. Was she someone he knew? He tried to formulate a question, but the words wouldn't come out. He was confused, lost, as if he were facing a puzzle he had never imagined putting together. Through the pain and shock, he began to understand. Thomas muttered, still trying to absorb the revelation. You are telling me that the man you met also has a wife, and that she, yes, Lauren replied, sobbing, unable to contain the guilt and regret. She's someone who was once part of our life, and you know her. He felt his breathing quicken, his heart beating uncontrollably. Lauren continued, the words coming out choppy. I didn't mean to. Thomas, forgive me. I never thought that, she was yours. Her words were lost in the air, but the impact was already made. He realized, as if in a snap, the identity of that woman. She, the wife of the man Lauren now called her lover, was someone who, in the past, had been deeply connected to him. An ex-girlfriend. The same person he almost built a life with before meeting Lauren. He recoiled, as if he had been punched. Each piece now fell into place, revealing a picture of a betrayal on multiple levels, where not only the trust between husband and wife had been broken, but also the memories of an old love, a bond he thought was behind him. Lauren, seeing the pain in Thomas's face, tried to get closer, but he raised his hand, stopping her. Don't come any closer, he said, his voice firm, but his eyes filled with sadness. You destroyed not only what we had, but also what I once felt for her. He turned, walking towards the door. Lauren, in an act of desperation, grabbed his arm. Thomas, please, I know I made a mistake, but it was an impulse, something I didn't even know how to control. And I still love you. He stared at her, his expression hardened, an anger that only time and suffering can build. You threw away everything we built, Lauren. And not just that. He made a point of bringing to light ghosts that shouldn't even exist anymore. He walked away, feeling every word weighing him down. Thomas left the house with heavy steps, feeling the weight of the revelation he had just experienced. Anger still pulsed in his chest, but now it was accompanied by a feeling of deep emptiness. He walked aimlessly through the streets, trying to organize the whirlwind of thoughts that took over his mind. The city around him, the sounds, the people, everything seemed distant and unimportant, as if he were trapped in a parallel reality where everything had become opaque, devoid of life. He wanted to scream, question how someone he loved so much could betray him and, at the same time, touch on wounds from the past that he had buried. The memory of his lover's wife, someone he had once loved intensely and who had now also been betrayed, only intensified the complexity of the situation. In a way, he felt doubly betrayed, not only by Lauren, but by the life itself that had put him in such a cruel position, where an old love and current betrayal intersected in a devastating way. The world seemed cruelly small, suffocating. The moral dilemma that arose tore him apart. He felt the need to confront Lauren's lover's wife, his old girlfriend, and unmask everything that was hidden, revealing the layers of lies that surrounded them. But there was also the weight of the consequences, the fear of causing more suffering to someone who, deep down, he still respected. Thomas stopped in a deserted park, sitting on a worn wooden bench. He placed his hands over his face, trying to regain control. There was a part of him that cried out for revenge, for exposing everyone, making Lauren and her lover face the weight of their actions. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the pain this would cause to his lover's wife, someone who, even though distant, still held a special place in his heart. As he pondered, a whirlwind of memories resurfaced. He thought about the time when he had dated the woman who was now a victim, like him, of that betrayal. He remembered how kind she was, with a sweet smile and a personality that balanced his own intensity. They had ended in a civilized way, with a promise that they would both follow different paths, but with mutual respect. There was never resentment, just the certainty that their lives would take different directions. Now, all that seemed to turn into dust in the face of the pain and suffering that she, like him, was about to face. The feeling of betrayal was mixed with the pain of seeing his life falling apart. He was no longer the safe, confident man he always thought he was. Now he was just someone trying to deal with the weight of decisions that weren't his, of lies that he hadn't chosen but that affected every part of his existence. In the midst of this internal confusion, a decision began to form. He knew he couldn't move forward without confronting Lauren, without demanding that she face the results of her own actions. When he returned home that night, he found Lauren sitting on the couch, with red eyes and a defeated expression. She looked at him with a mixture of regret and fear, as if she knew that any words would be insufficient to undo what she had done. Thomas remained silent for a few minutes, studying her, trying to understand what, if anything, was left between them. He approached her slowly, feeling the weight of hurt in each step, until he was facing her. Lauren watched him, her body tense, waiting for the words he would say, without the courage to say her own. She knew that anything she tried to justify would sound like an empty excuse, and, deep down, she wanted him to give her a chance, even though she knew it was unlikely. "I want you to be honest with me, Lauren," he began, his voice low but firm. "I don't expect justifications, I don't want to know why you did it. I just want to understand how you could have hidden this for so long." She took a deep, hesitant breath, and for a moment it seemed like she was going to back away, but then, as if something was urging her on, she began to speak. "Thomas, I know that nothing I say will ease what you're feeling, but, it was a combination of moments of loneliness, of confusion. And I'm not trying to justify anything. I failed. I messed up. And I know that." He looked at her in disbelief. "Loneliness," he repeated, bitterly. "You had someone by your side the whole time. I've been here, Lauren, every day, every night. How can you call this loneliness?" She looked away, tears streaming down her face. "I know you were here. But somehow it felt like we weren't together anymore. I got lost, Thomas, and I went after something I don't even know what it is." She fell silent, her voice trailing off as if words were insufficient. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "Didn't you realize what that would mean? That it would destroy everything we've built? Every moment, every memory, you threw it all away." She shook her head slowly, her eyes red. "I know, Thomas. I know I hurt you and myself. But I can't go back. I just wanted you to know that I still love you." Thomas laughed, a dry, bitter laugh. "Love?" He stared at her, his expression filled with pain. "You call that love? Cheat, lie, destroy someone? If this is love, Lauren, then I wonder what's left for us." She watched him, defeated, and realized that any argument she had was lost. There was nothing that could erase what she had done. Thomas got up, unable to bear this conversation any longer, and went to the bedroom, leaving her alone in the heavy silence of the room. He knew that nothing more could be done there. In the bedroom, he took out his cell phone, pondering whether he should look for Lauren's lover's wife and tell her everything. He wished, more than anything, that she knew the truth, that she faced that reality just as he was facing it. But the fear of causing more pain to someone who had already been part of his life stopped him. It was an all-consuming dilemma, and he wondered if, somehow, the truth would bring peace or just prolong the suffering. Throughout that night, the hours seemed to drag by, and Thomas lay awake, unable to close his eyes. In the silence, he felt the weight of his decision approaching, as if he knew that, regardless of what he chose, the end would be painful. But he was certain of one thing: there was no going back. The next morning, Thomas woke up with the feeling that this would be the last time he would pass by the house where he had built so many years of life with Lauren. After a night of anguish and decisions, he already knew what he would do. Even though he felt a deep emptiness, there was also a certain calm, as if he finally knew that his path was set. He looked at the details of the room, the photos of happy moments, the furniture that they had chosen together. He knew that it had all become just part of a story that he was now preparing to leave behind. He went downstairs and found Lauren in the kitchen. She was haggard, her eyes swollen and her face pale. When he saw him, he tried to give a regretful smile, but Thomas didn't return it. Her expression was firm, and he knew that nothing she said would change what she was about to do. He sat down at the table and, without looking away from her, began to speak. "This ends here, Lauren. There's nothing left between us. I have already accepted that everything we had was destroyed, and now, we need to move on. We can't pretend this marriage still exists." The words came out firmly, without hesitation, but, inside him, the weight of each sentence reverberated like an echo. Lauren nodded, trying to control her tears. She knew there was no room for excuses or explanations. "I knew the damage was irreversible." He tried to get closer to Thomas, lightly touching his hand. "I know nothing can fix what I did, Thomas. But still, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you like that." He removed his hand, without looking at her directly. "Apologies don't erase anything, Lauren. I never wanted to be cheated on either, but here we are. I'm leaving today and, from now on, you will also need to face the consequences of what you chose." He stood up, took one last look at her, and left, leaving a devastated Lauren behind. Before leaving that life definitively, Thomas still needed to close the last chapter of that dark story. He got in the car and drove to Lauren's lover's wife's house. "I knew this decision would have repercussions, but deep down I felt she had the right to know the truth." After a few minutes standing in front of the house, he took a deep breath and knocked on the door. She answered him, surprised and confused to see him there, someone she barely expected to meet again. His eyes conveyed a mix of serenity and sadness, as if his silent pain was shared, even if she didn't know why. "Can I come in?" he asked. She nodded, and the two headed into the living room, where Thomas finally revealed what he had been hiding for so long. As she heard Thomas's words, her expression changed. First, unbelief, then, a deep sadness, and, finally, the bitter acceptance of a truth she never wanted to imagine. She clenched her hands, trying to control the pain that was beginning to manifest itself in silent tears. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, looking at the floor, absorbing the devastating revelation. Thomas, with a sympathetic look, continued, "I didn't know how to deal with it either. But I felt like you needed to know. I couldn't leave you living in a lie, just like I did." They shared a moment of silence, both feeling the weight of that betrayal, the end of illusions, the beginning of a new reality, painful but liberating. Deep down, Thomas realized that despite all the pain, there was a strange relief in being by her side, as if, somehow, they both shared a mutual understanding that connected them. The days that followed were a process of reconstruction, both for Thomas and for his lover's wife. From that meeting on, they began to support each other, discovering that, even in the midst of chaos, there was a force that united them. On several occasions, they exchanged messages or connections, sharing reflections and advice, learning together to deal with the scars that betrayal had left. Both were far from completely regaining peace, but they realized that the support they found in each other was a kind of redemption. As for Lauren, her life has been consumed by guilt. The people around him began to notice his haggard state, his empty eyes and his resigned posture. She tried to continue with her routine, with her art, but everything seemed empty. What once filled her now constantly reminded her of what she had lost, of the love she had destroyed. The lover with whom she had cheated on Thomas had also abandoned her, and she found herself alone, with the consequences of her choices. Every space in the house seemed haunted by the memory of her husband, of moments that could never be recovered. The distance between her and Thomas became definitive. In her solitary reflections, she realized that the loss of trust was too high a price for anyone to pay. "I would never see Thomas's eyes with the same lightness again, would never again feel the comfort of his presence, and with each passing day, I understood the gravity of what I had done." As for Lauren's lover, he faced an equally unforgiving fate. When his wife, after the revelation, decided to confront him, He realized that the stability he had thought he could maintain had crumbled. His personal and professional life were impacted, and he began to deal with distrust and contempt from everyone around him. The burden of his choices weighed on him, and he also began to experience the consequences of a selfish desire that, instead of filling the void, left him isolated and discredited. In the end, Thomas and his lover's wife went on with their lives, each rebuilding themselves little by little, strengthened by the bitter experience, but also by the understanding that there was still life beyond the pain. The trust they had lost could not be regained quickly, but they allowed themselves to open a space for a friendship based on sincerity and respect. Whether something more would emerge between them, time would tell, but for now, their mutual company was enough to fill the loneliness. And so, Thomas found a new way to move forward, more aware of himself, more cautious, but also stronger. There was a scar on his heart, but in time, he would learn to carry that mark as a reminder of his resilience. Instead of letting the betrayal destroy him, he chose to use it as fuel for a new beginning, a new phase, where he would know how to value each moment and, above all, better choose the people around him. If you made it this far, comment what you thought of this story. We want to know your opinion about the characters and the twists. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, full of emotion and life lessons. Here, we make it clear, we do not support any type of betrayal. These stories are a warning about the devastating impact that disloyalty can have on people's lives.